The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, national, state, and local political organization which encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We take positions on issues after study, discussion, and reaching consensus, and then we advocate with our legislators, Scott, Julie, Congressman Dole, and Senators Kirk and Durbin. Our next program will be Water, Just What Are We Drinking? Presented by Echo Myths. It will be Sunday, February 22nd at Hotchkiss Hall, Lake Forest College at 1:30 p.m. Please join us. And now I'm very happy to introduce today's moderator, Melanie Romo. Melanie is an attorney practicing in estate planning and probation with an office in Lake Forest. Her many volunteer commitments include chairing the board of Lake Forest Open Lands Association. Melanie?
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be moderating this forum tonight on a very timely and informative topic, and thank you for Scott for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with us. And again, Julie Morrison certainly sends her regrets and sent Joe Piasecki to us. And that first handout, the one with the dollar bill on it, is from Julie Morrison's office. And the second handout is from Representative Drury's office. The League would like me to read this statement from the League regarding fiscal policy. On January 1st of this year, the Illinois income tax on individuals decreased to 3.7% from 5%. This will result in a loss of $2 billion in revenue in fiscal year 2015 and $3 billion in fiscal year 2016. The new revenues collected after 2011, when the income tax went from 3% to 5%, were used to pay for pension obligations. Funding was flat for other services paid out of general revenue funds, including education, health, social services, and public policy. The Center for Tax and Budget Accountability says that if spending is not reduced, the budget deficit will be $6.8 billion in fiscal year 2015 and $12.7 billion in fiscal year 2016. Poor and middle income taxpayers pay a larger percentage of their income in taxes than wealthy people. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Drury.
Hi, good evening. I'm Scott Drury. Thank you to the League. Thank you for agreeing to moderate this. The format's a little bit different. I guess we were supposed to be sitting, but since it's just me, I felt kind of weird sitting off to the corner, having questions thrown just at me, so I'm going to stand and try to make it a little bit more informal. I just have a few slides to show to get us started, and then hopefully it can be more just a question and answer session. And I'm happy to spend as much time as people are willing to listen to me to talk about this issue. Obviously, it's one that we've been hearing about for a long time. The fiscal crisis, I think, was at the forefront of the gubernatorial race. We have a new governor in place. The people have spoken. And this meeting is timely, but a little early. On Wednesday, next Wednesday, the governor is going to give his budget address. And I think a lot of the questions that I'll probably be getting tonight are going to leave, the answers are going to leave you somewhat dissatisfied, because I don't know what the governor is going to say in the budget address, and the big question is going to be, how are we going to get out of this fiscal mess? And I'm going to show you some of the numbers in a minute. So I will do my best to answer the questions, and it's not that we're trying to avoid the questions, but my take has been this. I'm a Democrat, but I am a Democrat who is willing to work with the governor's administration. I think I've already shown that to the first press conference he had after being inaugurated. He invited me to attend that, where he signed an executive order implementing a lot of ethics legislation that I've been advocating since I got into office. And today I just got a phone call from the governor that he's appointed me to a criminal justice commission. So I want to work with the governor, but to do that, we have to hear what he has to say. I don't want to say his ideas are good or bad because I don't know what they are yet in terms of the budget. So I'm sorry. So we'll be able to talk about the state of the state as it is today, talk about what the issues are that the budget is going to have to address, but the question of how the governor plans to do it and whether or not I will agree or disagree with that, I'm not going to be able to answer today, but certainly feel free to ask the questions because I think everybody learns from that. If we could just go to the next slide. So this, I know the numbers are tiny, it's also the sheet that we handed out, and in a second I'm going to blow up some of the more important numbers. This document is actually issued by the governor's office. It was issued by Governor Quinn in late December. He's obligated to do this. Every governor's obligated to do this, which is a 3-year budget projection. One of the biggest criticisms of Illinois in the past was, we budget for today and we don't really look at where we're going to be tomorrow or in a year or in 2 years or in 3 years. So now every governor is required to put out this forecast of where we think the state is going to be in the current fiscal year, which is currently, or we're in fiscal year 2015, we're right in the middle of it, that will end June 30th, and then for the 3 fiscal years coming up, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And if we just go to the next slide, and we can come back to this, but again, I know the numbers are really small. This is what we're going to see in terms of revenue, and this is largely in part because of the decrease in the personal income tax from 5% to 3.75. So our revenue for 2014, which was the last fiscal year, Illinois took in about $37 billion. That goes into the general revenue fund that's spent on prisons, on education, on human services, on public safety, and on pensions, I should say. 2015 is the first year that we're seeing the rollback, and it's just for half of the fiscal year because, again, Illinois, we're not on the calendar year. Our year starts July 1st, and it ends June 30th. So January 1st is when the tax rolled back, and for about 6 months, we're losing the tax increase revenue. So you're seeing a decrease in revenue in 2015 to about $35.5 billion. 2016 is when we're going to see the first full effect of the tax, the 5% tax rolling back to 3.75. And as you see, we lose about $5 billion in revenue from 36 or 37 billion to 32 billion. 2017, it's roughly the same. And then 2018, it starts going up, not because the tax is going up, but because I think that the projection is that the economy will be better. And that's how it's nice to work that way. You can just project that we hope it's better in 2018 and that there'll be more revenue coming in. Now, if we stay on this slide for a second, I didn't make another one, but if you look on the sheets that we handed out, and if someone doesn't have it, we can hand out more later. If you look at the very bottom, there's an orange line. It says general fund surplus/deficit. And that just talks about what the projections are of where the state will be at the end of each of these fiscal years. And so at the end of 2015, June 30th of this year, it's projected that there'll be a $180 million deficit that will be short. And that's in large part due to the reduction in the taxes. Where it really comes to light is in 2016, you'll see that it's projected that will be about $5.7 billion in the negative. And that is the fiscal crisis, that is the fiscal challenge, that is the answer, the question and the answer that people want to know, and I think we'll get a glimpse of what the answer is going to be next Wednesday when the governor gives his budget address. And you can see in 2017, it sticks around $5.8 billion, so over the next 2 years, it's about $11 billion deficit that Illinois will run. And then in 2018, it's another $5 billion. Now, that's assuming that nothing changes. Okay, that's assuming that we spend as much as we've been spending, we don't take in any more revenue than we've been taking in. That's just, if everything is as it is today, we will be about $5 to $6 billion short for the foreseeable future. If we go to the next slide. This next slide goes to another big part of Illinois' fiscal problem, which is Illinois cannot go bankrupt. Otherwise, it would have, right? Because anyone who's in business or has had friends or had their own financial troubles, if your bills exceed your revenue and you can't pay your bills, someone could actually force you into bankruptcy to get paid. Illinois cannot, but Illinois has not been able to pay its bills in full for years. We got it down to about $3.9 billion in fiscal year 2014, and that was, we were able to do that because of the tax increase, and we were able to make our pension payments. But really, when we say unpaid bills, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. These are services from real providers, non-corrupt services. This, I won't put into, we could dispute whether the program's good or bad, but these are services rendered, and Illinois just isn't paying them. So at the end of the year, it's, if you don't want to pay your phone bill, you just don't pay it. And so Illinois now, when it was down to $4 billion, the sad part for me was that I'd be in Springfield and they would talk about, look, our bill, we only have $4 billion in unpaid bills this year, because it used to be $10 billion. And so $4 billion seemed good. But this is real money, and I could put my own imprint on it. I go to doctors because the doctors now are the ones, it's our medical insurance bills that we're really putting off the most, and a lot of medical providers are saying, you know what, you submit it, pay me, and you submit the bill to the insurance company, because I'm not going to get paid for 6 months, maybe a year. And that's just a small portion. I'm not complaining, I'm not crying. I mean, it's real. We've had AT&T at our district office say they're going to shut off our phones because the state isn't paying them. So it's not just major providers, it's Illinois just has everyone in a queue, and when there's money in the bank, Illinois pays. When it's at $4 billion, people are getting paid in 3 to 6 months. But if you look at what is projected, in 2015 it will stick around $4 billion because the big part of the tax decrease isn't going to hit yet. But then 2016, it's almost $10 billion, and by 2018, Illinois will have about $21 billion in bills that it's not paying. And the reason that it's not paying those bills is because it's going to be funding other services. The show must go on, government must go on. But if you look at the $21 billion and you compare it to what our revenue reduction is going to be is 33.9, and if you look at what our total revenue is in 2018, which is the blue line at the top of that chart, it says total resources. In 2018, the total projected revenue is about $34 billion. Our unpaid bills is going to be projected at about $21 billion. So clearly, Illinois, as it is right now, is on a crash course towards a disaster. Some may say we're already there. Yeah, so by 2018, the total amount of unpaid bills is projected to be about $21 billion. And again, these aren't my numbers. I'm not trying to spin the facts. Someone may take issue and say, I think it's going to be higher. Someone may say it's going to be lower. This is the data that's coming out from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. The new governor hasn't put out any projection that he may have, but this is at least what's publicly available. And any of you, if you went to illinois.gov, could pull up this sheet and look at the sheet in more detail if you wanted to. So that is the problem. And I don't know if we want to do question and answer. I just don't want to lecture all day. I'm happy to answer what people's questions are rather than assuming what they are.
So the format from here on, Representative Drury made a statement, and I have a few questions that the League has posed, which I'll ask of Representative Drury, and then there are question cards that have they been passed yet? They will be passed around, along with some pencils, and you can write questions on those cards, and then so that there isn't a duplication of questions, they'll go to the table in the back where the League will combine questions together and give them to me, and I will pose the questions. This is a usual League format that certainly League members are very familiar with, and you'll find it works pretty well. So I will begin with some League questions for Representative Drury. If the Illinois Supreme Court scraps the recent pension overhaul law and provides guidance as to what would be legal under the Illinois Constitution, Will you support passing a bill incorporating that guidance? If the Supreme Court provides no guidance, what should be done then? A constitutional amendment allowing pension changes?
The first part, and just some history, back in 2013, Illinois passed pension reform. I voted in favor of it, and when I voted in favor of it, there were a lot of people saying, you can't vote for this, it's unconstitutional. And so why are you wasting your time? And my argument to that was, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm a lawyer, but I'm certainly not an Illinois constitutional scholar. I didn't think any of my colleagues fit into that boat, or they'd be on the Supreme Court, not sitting next to me. And said, you know, the benefit of passing this reform is to let it get to the court and stop being hamsters in a wheel, and let's get an answer to what we can do or what we can't do. It upset a lot of people. It upset a lot of my friends who were, you know, teachers, work for the state. But I thought it was the right thing to do. I think it was the right thing to do. And one of my arguments was the Supreme Court, hopefully, if they say it's unconstitutional, will give us guidance, and then we won't just be throwing darts at a wall. We'll be able to say, this is what the court says we can do, and the negotiation on both sides then can be a real one, where everyone knows this can happen and it's not just guesswork. If the Supreme Court comes back and says it's unconstitutional, and they say it's unconstitutional because of X, Y, and Z, then certainly we have to sit down and have that negotiation and use X, Y, and Z. Will I support it exactly as the Supreme Court says, or will there be a negotiation that comes out somewhere in between? It's hard to say. But I've already supported the reforms. If the court says that there's a different way to do it, I'm certainly going to be in those discussions. And as a member of the House's Pension Committee, I certainly know the discussions are going to be in front of me. It's not going to be something that I can avoid. The second part of the question is, what if the Supreme Court just says you can't do pension reform? They've given an indication that they might do that. There was a ruling last summer on reforms to health care benefits that the House did back, that the Illinois did back in 2011. The Supreme Court says you can't do it. The pension provision in the Constitution is very clear. You shall not diminish the benefit. And what don't you understand about that? If they take that same tact with what we did in 2013, they will say you shall not diminish the benefit, you're diminishing it, and you can't do it. That puts us in the trick bag of, well, what do you do? Because these numbers, I believe, assume that the pension reform is going to go into place. If not, we're actually worse off than we've even talked about. If the court says you can't do anything, then there's a few options, and I don't know how realistic any one of them is. The question was, would you support a constitutional amendment? Whether I do or I don't, getting 71 votes in the House and 30 votes in the Senate for that amendment isn't going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. So there's going to have to be a bigger discussion of what do we do, you know, and it's going to involve tax policy, it's going to involve spending policy, and it's going to, you know, require everyone to make a lot of tough decisions. I think the opinion is going to come out in March, is at least what the Supreme Court has indicated. So we'll get the budget address next week, and then within the next month and a half, we may have a pension decision that will give us all, you know, quite a good idea of where the state is headed and what we're going to need to do, which, you know, I'm not here to be a downer. I think it's good for us to have this real information. You know, a lot of people said you can't show these numbers. You know, you're not supposed to show numbers like this. But I think you do need to show these numbers. I think people need to see where the state is at, and then let's have a real discussion about how we want to get those negative numbers positive. And, you know, there's only a few ways to do it. You could cut, you could increase revenue, or do a combination of both, or, you know, more business can come here and Illinois can flourish, the economy can get better. But the solutions, there's not that many that we're looking at. It's just obviously there's always the divide of cutting versus spending, as if you can't look at doing both. But I think, you know, even the governor, the new governor, Governor Rauner, is proposing a mixture of both. If I'm reading the tea leaves right, he wants to expand the sales tax base to generate more revenue. And he also is talking about reforming government and negotiating away bigger contracts, which is on the spending side. And I think, you know, he's brought in consultants that in other states have made a lot of major cuts. So I think even the new governor sees that there are two sides to this. There's revenue and spending, and it's not an either or. It's just a matter of how you get there.
On the topic of more revenue, is the sales tax on some or all services something you would support if the governor proposes it?
You know, it's something that I've given a lot of thought to and am still considering. I don't know what the proposal is going to be. He hasn't defined what the services are going to be and hasn't said if it gets us where we need to go, how close it gets us. I think that any package is going to have to include some revenue measures, as I think the governor is showing. But what I don't want to do is get involved in some sort of revenue increase, some sort of cuts, and we're still $10 billion in the hole. That's always been my frustration. You know, this governor, he seems sincere about wanting to fix Illinois. A lot of people will disagree with the way he wants to go about it, and I'm sure there's going to be things I disagree with. But I hope that at least when he puts out a plan, it's a plan that gets us balanced, and it doesn't get us balanced through tricks, which is what our budget is this year. You know, we said we passed a balanced budget, but it was balanced by borrowing $650 million from ourselves, from other funds, and that's just not right. And so, you know, I know the next few questions are going to talk about supporting other tax policies. My gripe in the 2 years I've been in office has been we get, you know, policies thrown at us one by one, and it's not a comprehensive package of how do all these policies fit together, how does it fix the problem. And I just think that Illinois is beyond, you know, plugging a hole in a dam and having 13 others spring out. We have to have a comprehensive solution to this. I plan to be part of that comprehensive solution. So certainly the increase or a broadening of the sales tax is something that I'm open to considering, but I'd have to see where it fits with everything else.
And you're right, the next question also has to do with revenue. Would you support taxing retirement pension income except for Social Security?
You know, that it's going to be a lot of the same answer. Illinois is one of 3 states in the country that doesn't tax retirement income. That's a fact. And I don't know that there's been a proposal out there. I know it's always thrown out by some people. I don't know that there's any serious movement in the General Assembly to do that, and I don't know how much revenue it raises. I think that everything is going to be considered. When you're looking at numbers like this, everything needs to be considered, and some may be accepted, and some I may support, and others I won't, but you certainly have to have an open mind to looking at the ideas. I don't think anyone can say that, you know, I have the one solution and it's the only way to go. I don't even think Governor Rauner has said that.
Now we're on the other side of the equation. What, if any, spending cuts would you like to see?
You know, I think a big area where there can be spending cuts and where I'm currently working on finding spending cuts is in the Department of Corrections and Criminal Justice. Illinois and every state, the federal government as well, we spend so much money putting people in prison that prison has become an industry, that we build prisons to keep for jobs. And that was never really what it was meant to be. You know, prison towns have become like Detroit in terms of it's a car town and everyone depends on the prison for work. And certainly I want to see people have jobs, but we shouldn't be having prisons and filling prisons to make sure that everybody has a job in this state. There are a lot of unique things going on in different parts of the country being proposed in Republican legislatures and Democratic ones that try to treat people rather than put them in prison. We have about 40% of our people in prison now are mentally ill. And they don't get any treatment when they go to prison. And they come out and they're still mentally ill. But we've all just spent a lot of our tax money to keep them in prison, not getting better, and when they get out, they don't get any medication, and so the police know some of these people. They just pick them up, and they're just being cycled in and out. Texas, which I don't consider a state of a liberal bastion state, a lot of their cities are doing, you know, fabulous things where they don't take the person right to jail. They take them to a treatment facility. And they find out if they are mentally ill or if they have a drug problem, and they don't get a free pass. If they don't do the treatment program, then they can go to prison. But if they do and they become productive, you find out that these people actually aren't going to be criminals. They may go to work and they may earn revenue. They may pay tax, and so it's a win-win. And I just think the state needs to be looking at that because we spend a huge amount of money on public safety. And we want the public to be safe. I want the public to be safe. I was a prosecutor. But I think that this is something that we're going to look at that can save a lot of money. And, you know, I think every program besides that needs to be looked at. Medicaid. People who deserve to be on the Medicaid program, who qualify for it, should absolutely have it. But we know that there are people who don't live in Illinois who are still getting Medicaid. There somehow are dead people who are getting Medicaid. And, you know, Illinois hired a consultant to try to find these people, and then it's unclear that the consultant no longer is doing his job. Maybe it was doing his job too well, and so they got rid of the consultant. But that's one of our biggest expenditures. And I would rather that money be spent on the people who need the help than people who are just abusing the program. And so I think these are areas. No one of these programs is going to get us the $6 billion in debt every year. I mean, again, it's got to be a combination of everything. But these are big programs. You know, sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm gonna get rid of the state planes." Okay, that's in the millions. It's not in the billions. We have to be looking at the big programs and where the money goes, and to do that, you have to be looking at Medicaid and righting that ship, and you have to be looking at criminal justice and righting that ship if we're really going to make a dent.
The next question, again, goes back to increases in revenue. Is a graduated income tax worth pursuing? And I know that you've just discussed how you would look at it in a total package, but I think that in general, how do you feel about a graduated income tax?
You know, I think a graduated income tax as a concept is not a bad thing. We all are probably preparing our taxes on the federal side right now, and if not, or maybe you're ahead of the game and you've already done it. The federal government has a graduated income tax, and so we're all used to it. It's not a unique concept. My problem with a graduated income tax in Illinois right now is that the problem is so bad, and no one knows what the revenue numbers are, no one knows what numbers we need to get to, that I think changing the game midstream before we fix the problem and explain to people how the problem is going to be fixed is somewhat disingenuous. It was more disingenuous last year when the tax was supposed to roll back. And that's when there was a real serious discussion about the graduated income tax, and I was very involved in all of those discussions. But I didn't like it from a good government standpoint because the tax was supposed to roll back to 3.75. They came out with some rates for the income tax, and they said everybody, 90% of the people are going to get a tax reduction. And that was the marketing for that plan. But it was a tax reduction from the 5%. And it was glossing over the fact that it was supposed to go down to 3.75, and so for those 90% of people, 100% of the people actually would have had a tax increase from what it was supposed to be. And I just think that it makes it hard for me as a public official to talk to people and say, you should believe me and I'm credible and you should trust what we're doing, when at the same time we're saying things that we know aren't completely true. The other thing about the graduated income tax that frustrated me last year as it was proposed was that it wasn't going to generate more income. And I had a meeting in my district office. I had about 15 people there, and we were talking about the graduated income tax. And so I said, revenue positive, revenue negative, or revenue neutral, assuming that this big push was because it was going to be revenue positive, it was going to generate revenue and help the state. It turned out it was going to be, I think, about like 100, maybe 200 million revenue negative. And what I didn't like about that was that everybody said these are the rates, and whether you say, you know, these rates are going to lower your taxes for 80% of the people, 90% of the people, it was clear to me that those rates couldn't stick because it was revenue negative, and it didn't help anything. It was just a way to get it passed, and then the next year it was going to have to be increased. And again, I just didn't like the marketing of it. If you're going to do something, tell people. You know, if the numbers are bad, show people bad numbers. We're adults, we can handle it. You know, if you don't like what I have to say, then you'll have a chance to not vote for me. But I don't think that it was the right way to go about doing it. If there was a different discussion of this and how we wanted to get there, I'm always willing to have the discussions, but I thought last year it got off track from a graduated tax is a better type of system to this is going to reduce your taxes, and when it got to that sort of marketing, it certainly wasn't anything I could support.
How about the millionaire's tax? Is that worth pursuing?
The millionaire's tax is another offshoot of the graduated income tax. I particularly didn't like the millionaire's tax last year. It was going to be a constitutional amendment that was going to put in the Constitution that at a certain bracket you're always going to pay 3% more. So it would have been 8% if the tax stayed at 5%, and now it would be 6.75%. I don't know of other places that put in their constitutions what someone's tax rate is going to be. I certainly didn't think it was right to tell people we have no idea what your tax is going to be, but whatever it is going to be 3% more than whatever anybody else is paying. And that's without, giving, whether or not people can pay more or less, and whether or not that generates more revenue or not is actually a big debate. Minnesota put one of these taxes in place, and so did, I believe, Maryland. And if I'm wrong on Maryland, I apologize. But they've, in some studies in these states, they found that those that ended up being revenue negative because of the amount of people that were leaving the state and leaving their revenue behind. This isn't me trying to protect people who make a lot of money. You have to look at what the impact of this is going to be beyond the politics of it, right? It's very easy to say, let's tax rich people more money, and that's fine if they're going to pay it. And where this system is working is in California. And what the studies have shown is it works in California because people aren't leaving California. But California has Hollywood, it has Silicon Valley, it has a lot of reasons for people to stay. But in states like Minnesota, which are, I think, more akin to Illinois in terms of is it a destination state or not, you find that people are more fluid and more willing to leave. So is it something I would consider? Again, I apologize for this. Yes, but you have to really look at what it's going to do, and is it beyond just the politics of it, and does it help fix Illinois, and is it part of other reforms that are going to get us where we need to be?
Following up on that, we have questions from the audience. How does a 3.7% flat income tax in Illinois compare to other states' income tax rates? Is there a low income tax, or is there sort of an average income tax for other states? And so is it realistic to consider returning to the 5% income tax? So surrounding states, what are their rates, if you know?
I don't know. I did a presentation 2 years ago where I had all of that data and had a slide up. As of 2 years ago, when Illinois was at 5%, Illinois was in the middle of the road. Everyone always talked about how high Illinois' income taxes were, and it's an oppressive state. At a pure income tax level, Illinois at 5% was middle of the road, so I'm going to guess that at 3.75 we're more towards the lower end of tax rates. But where Illinois starts becoming a high tax state is when you look at all the other taxes Illinois has. When you throw our property taxes into the equation, Illinois jumps very high. When you include the corporate income taxes, when you include the sales taxes, Illinois becomes a high taxing state. And so again, it's when you look at the whole picture, we're a very high taxing state, and it's just the way we do things. And that's why I say these answers aren't simple. And you could say, well, 3.75 is too low. Look, we're in the bottom 15 of states, so we should be at 5, and now we're at 25. But that doesn't show the whole picture. And and to me, I think you got to look at everything. In this community, our property taxes are very high, and we pay them for our schools. But their property taxes are very high, and they don't really take into consideration what your income is. Your property value may have gone down, your income may have gone down, but your property taxes seemingly have continued to go up. Mine have. And so that's something that I know a lot of people are looking at, but there's proposals, let's freeze the property tax. I think that's a politically good thing to say, but if you freeze the property tax and the schools need more money legitimately, and we could debate whether they do or not, where's that going to come from? Who's going to fund that? So all of these things, fit together, and I just think that government a lot of times does a disservice to the public by just saying we're going to fix this one thing, and not really, again, using the hole in the dam, not looking at what other things sprout out when you just plug one hole.
And following up on that, then how do local government units prepare for the future, not knowing what the state will or will not give them?
It's, the governor, he has promised, at least when I saw him speak at the Northwest Municipal Conference, I was at a luncheon where he spoke about 3 weeks ago, that he is going to turn over all the money that the state owes the local governments. It's called the Local Government Distributive Fund. In some years, the state would hold that money back and not turn it over. He's committed to doing that. But, the states they're one step, below us in terms of we get money from the federal government, and then, we take that money and we distribute it, and a lot goes to the local governments. And I think any local government looking at these numbers has to start preparing, or at least be in discussions with the governor's office and with our office and with Julie Morrison's office about, what is being done to fix this. But, they have to look at the reality that if there is less money and there are cuts, that they may be having to make similar sorts of actions. And without knowing how these numbers are going to be fixed, and without knowing what Governor Rauner is going to propose, and whether or not the General Assembly is going to accept that or send him something different, and whether he's going to veto that, and whether there's going to be a government shutdown, without knowing any of this, it's really hard for local governments, for school districts, for a lot of people to plan. But it shouldn't come as a surprise to any single person, and I'm talking about a single entity of government, that there is a realistic possibility that there is going to be less money flowing from the state anywhere if these are the numbers that hold.
And so how much will local government's share of the state income tax be?
I don't know that offhand. Whoever asked the question, I'm certainly, if you come up to me afterwards, I'm happy to get back with you. That's information that we can get. I just don't know it offhand.
This individual understands that Illinois has over 500 special fund accounts that are outside of the general fund. How do these special fund accounts factor into the overall debt income picture, for better or worse?
So I think it's actually much higher than 500. But a special fund, just so make sure everybody understands what we're talking about, the numbers that we were showing, and this is just unpaid bills, but the numbers when it talks about revenue on that blue line at the top of the handout I gave, that's our general revenue. That's money when you pay your taxes, it goes into general revenue. There's a lot of funds when you pay for your license plates. You go to the Secretary of State. There's fees on that, and I think it's $4 from every time you get a license plate. $4 goes to a special Secretary of State fund. Some funds, if you buy a permit to go fishing, will go to the Department of Natural Resources Special Fund. And the reason that all these special funds were created over time was because no one wanted it going to the General Revenue Fund. It was kind of like, the talk back, I think it was the 2000 presidential election, of putting Social Security in a lockbox. Everyone remember the lockbox? Illinois has 500 or more lockboxes, which is, you can't touch this. This can't fund the state's general revenue because we know we're never going to see it. We want it only to go to Department of Natural Resources. We want to go to the Secretary of State. So what's happened in reality? Well, some of these special funds have built up over time because the department isn't using it. It doesn't need it this year, so there are millions of dollars sitting in a special fund. And we look at the general revenue fund when it comes budget time and say, boy, we're $650 million short. And this is exactly where we were last year at budget time. So where did they find $650 million? From the special funds. And they borrow it. They used to just sweep it. They used to just say, we're taking it and we'll give it back whenever we feel like it. And we put a law in place before I was there that says you can't sweep it anymore. That seems bad. So now we just borrow it. And we pay interest on it. So we borrow it from ourselves. We pay interest on it. We say that the budget is balanced, and we move along. I didn't vote for last year's budget because I just don't think that's right. And it's hard because there's a lot of good programs in a lot of these budgets that you want to see funded. If we went through every program, I bet everyone here would have something that they thought Illinois should be supporting. But the way we have historically balanced our budget, at least the last few years or maybe the last decade, has been by borrowing from ourselves and using what I call budgeting gimmicks. And I just don't think it's right. So are special funds good or bad? I don't know that it can be answered like that. It's bad the way we're using them. It's become our own little bank that we borrow from. And when there's not enough to borrow from them, where else do we borrow? Well, by 2018, we're going to borrow $21 billion from vendors, right? Because that's all we're doing is that we're saying we're not going to pay you, so you're giving us a loan, and we pay interest on that too. I mean, that interest, I believe, is at 9%. So if a vendor is in a position to deal with not getting paid, it's not a bad loan to make as long as the state pays it, a 9% loan. It's a really bad deal for all of us. because we're paying 9% because we can't get our fiscal house in order.
So just to clarify, does the governor have legal authority, though, to sweep those amounts from the special revenue fund?
The governor can't sweep them, right? The sweeping's gone, but we can borrow them, and we can pay interest on them, and that's what's been done. And you know, that's how the budget got done this year, was by borrowing them, by borrowing the funds, and it's a loan, so it's a documented loan. It's got to be paid back. But it's not just one thing the governor does, right? I mean, this is something the General Assembly, I mean, the way it works, the governor's going to propose his budget next Wednesday. There's going to be a lot of talk about whether it's a good budget or a bad budget. The General Assembly, the House, will then start having appropriations meetings, talking about, you know, where it wants to appropriate money. It may agree 100% with what the governor says. It may not. The Senate's going to have its own discussions about what they think the budget should be. They're each going to pass a budget bill. The House and Senate have to come together, or they don't pass any budget. And then if they pass it, they send it to the governor, and then the governor has to sign it or veto it. And that usually happens in late May. And that's how it works. You know, the last 12 years or 14 years, it's been Democratic General Assembly, a Democratic governor, and budgets have gotten done. This year is going to be different. I think it's a good thing. My 2 years there, I was on an appropriations committee, Human Services, which appropriates the most amount of money in the state. The other side of the aisle, and this isn't pointing fingers, they weren't very engaged. They just said, we don't like the budget, and they didn't partake in the negotiations of what the budget would be. It was just, we're not voting for this budget. I think now with a Republican governor, there will be more robust debate and discussion with both sides, because there will be a Republican agenda out there, a Republican budget that they can advocate for. There will be different ideas from the Democratic side, but I think that no one is just going to walk away from the table for the next few years. And I think that's a good thing. I think everybody should be involved, and no one should be able just to say no. You could say no, but I want this, but just to say no, I didn't think was very productive.
You give me great segues into questions, because this one is entitled Legislative Courage. And it asks, is there any talk among your legislative colleagues about an urgency, underlined, that might overcome the fear of voting in needed tax increases and spending cuts, or will it be more years of avoidance? So I think they're asking, is the determination there in the legislature to actually solve this problem?
I don't know. You know, I know that there are some of us who passionately believe in fixing the problem. And when I talk about some of us, it's some of us on both sides. And there are some of us on both sides who are perfectly fine with the way these numbers look. It is not a partisan issue. I know it's portrayed as one, and I'm not saying this to defend Democrats or denigrate Republicans. I'm just talking from experience that there is a hospital in everyone's district, Republican or Democratic, that gets state funding. And when it comes to that funding in their district, they don't want to give it up because it's tough and it's their constituents. There may be a road that will bring jobs to a district, Republican or Democratic, and they vote for it. You know, last year at the end of the year, after the budget passed, which I didn't vote for, a borrowing bill to fix the roads was put up there. And it was a huge bill. I forget the numbers at this point. It was a huge bill, and we were going to take out bonds, and we didn't know what the rate was going to be, but we were going to vote first on allowing the borrowing, and then after that vote on what the bond rates would be and how we would do this. And I believe there were only 10 or 15 people that voted against this. And my number's probably a little off, but I think it was 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans out of 118. And everybody else voted for it, which that was bipartisan. That was supported with bipartisan support. And afterwards, the 10 of us who voted against it, we just walked out shaking our heads like, how can we do this? Our budget's not balanced, and now the next thing we do is we're borrowing all this money. We don't know what it's going for, what it's going to fix. And it was a very telling moment for me, because it showed that the problem it's not a partisan issue. It's an issue of, you know, sound bites are partisan issues, but the reality of spending and wanting to spend in your district, that transcends party lines. I hope there's people with courage. I hope that Governor Rauner gives people courage if there's things that he does that, you know, will make the state better and, you know, not needlessly cut things that are really important. You know, we don't want to, people who need services, like I talked about mental health, people who need mental health services should get it. Otherwise, they're going to end up in jail and we're going to pay for them anyway. Or they're going to cause some other problem due to no fault of their own, but the fact that they're sick. But I hope that people have the courage to do the right thing and not worry about whether it's going to get them reelected in 2 years. You know, people always say, you know, you should have term limits and get term limits, and you know, whether we want those or not, and I'm not going to make this an ethics session, but every 2 years, right, people can get rid of me and all my colleagues if they don't like what we're doing, and I just wish more people would just stand up for what they believe in. I'm a firm believer that if I tell you what I believe in, you may not agree with me, or you may agree with me, and I hope that you'll agree with me, you know, at least 51% of the time. But my hope is that you'll respect me, that at least he was straight with me. He told me what he thought. I know he thought about the issue, and I wish he would agree with me, but I understand why he doesn't, because to me that's much more important than just saying yes to everybody and smiling. I think that is a big problem with government. It's one of the reasons that I ran, and I hope that there's more people that attitude is rubbing off on.
And so how can the legislature restore the taxpayers' trust that revenue will go to where it is promised? And this particular individual was concerned that lottery funds didn't go to education.
You know, again, I think the only way government can restore people's trust in government is for government to be trustworthy. It sounds pretty easy, but it's so hard. I mean, a lot of these tax proposals that we've talked about, these numbers that we're talking about, the graduated income tax that we talked about, all of that I think puts a dent in people's trust in government. I think the only way to get people to trust government is to stand before you and say, this is what I really believe, this is what I'm going to do, even if I know you disagree with me. And I've had to have those conversations. I mean, the progressive income tax, I will tell you, I don't know if amongst this people, I haven't done a poll, but it was very popular in the 58th district, which is what I represent, which is Glencoe, Northbrook, Highland Park, Deerfield, Highwood, Bannockburn, Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, and a little bit of North Chicago. It was very popular. I had a lot of people pushing me very hard. You have to support it. We need your vote. And, you know, and I looked at it and said it's not the right time to do it and gave the same reasons I gave here tonight. The easy thing to do would have been, I think, probably just to say yes to it. But I thought that the more honest thing to do, the thing that would build more trust with the constituents, with you, is to tell you why I opposed it and then stand by that decision, even if I knew that it wasn't going to make everybody happy. And if people didn't like that, then at least you know when you go to vote, you know where I stand. And I think you know, no one person can change government. Governor Rauner, he's implemented some ethics stuff that I've been behind. No one person is going to change people's view of Illinois government. The only way to change that is for Illinois government and all governments to be more honest with everybody and earn people's trust, which is very hard to do when you're always trying to get reelected. I mean, that's just the reality that's the nature of the beast, right?
Is there anything that can be done about unfunded state mandates to local jurisdictions? Since the state is having economic problems, that's coming down to local government as well, yet state mandates continue to come out of Springfield.
I think there can be, and I think there needs to be. You know, the easy thing for the state to do is just to say, well, we can't pay for something, let's have local government do it. We'll just, now this is an obligation you have, and we're not going to give you any more money for it, but good luck. And, you know, that, it's easy. If there's a real reason for the mandate, if it's public health or public safety, you know, certainly you have to take that into account. But I think that as we're looking at this, you know, I guess this new era that it seems that we're entering into, the new normal maybe, we don't know, that as part of that you have to look at the impact on the local governments. You can't just push everything onto your school districts and onto your local governments and expect them to fund everything through property taxes, because at some point there's going to be a revolt there. And so I think now is the time, if we're trying to get these numbers balanced, you can't balance it on the back of smaller governments. One thing we can do, and Illinois should do, that hasn't come up, but maybe it'll be the next question, I seem to be pretty good with that. Illinois has too much government. We have at least twice as many units of government as the next closest state, and it's by thousands. And it's hard to reduce government because a lot of these local bodies of government do good things. I mean, you could pick any local body of government. Every school district is an independent body of government. The school board is its own elected government. Park boards, mosquito abatement districts, water reclamation districts, the library boards. Illinois just has a lot of government. And one way to lower the cost on government and build up more critical mass is to consolidate some of these governments. And it's something that everybody talks about, but nothing seems to get done because, again, you're going to be stepping on someone's toes that as a politician might help you in your next election. Or it's your friend, or they're doing a really good job. I mean, I'm not here to bash on any one form of government, but why can every other state get by with half the amount of government and we can't? And so I think that has to be part of the equation as well. I mean, if we're going to look at changing the way Illinois functions and changing the way we balance our budget and making the state better, these are all ideas that need to be on the table, and I think they're ideas that my colleagues and I have to have the courage to vote for. If it's a good idea, I think we need to stand up and say it's a good idea and we need to do it, and that's what the public wants, and I hope that I can find a majority of my colleagues to do things like that.
What role do unions play in the state budget deficit, and can you address Governor Rauner's latest proposals in that regard?
Unions, there are a lot of union jobs in the state. I don't know the numbers. I'm sure you could Google unions right now in Illinois, and there'll be a lot of stuff just given what Governor Rauner is doing. The unions, they negotiate for salaries for their workers, and the unions have PACs, and they donate to campaigns. Businesses do the same thing. What do they contribute to the deficit? We're paying union workers. If we think union wages are too high, then it's unfairly contributing to the deficit in Illinois. If we think union wages are allowing people to have good jobs and spend money in the state and it's trickling down and it's working through the economy, it doesn't have a negative. The governor's executive order, he's passionate about it, that his belief that people who don't want to be in a union shouldn't have to pay union dues. It's not an issue that I remotely pretend to be an expert in. I know that there was case law on the private side last year that I think came out of Illinois that they said that you can't force a home health care worker to pay union dues, and that the governor is using that, I believe, as the legal basis for what he's trying to do. I think the courts are going to have to look at whether or not that can be done. And it's something that I have to research more because I think it's going to be a big issue in the General Assembly this year of what can be done and what is the divide between executive authority and legislative authority. I mean, it's interesting, right? It's no different than what's going on in the federal government, except the bodies are switched. President Obama puts out a lot of executive orders and Congress says you can't do that. And they argue about it, and I'm not taking sides, and now we're going to have a Republican governor who's, passionate about getting things done and knows he can do it faster through executive order. And so he has been issuing a lot of executive orders, and it's going to take a while for the General Assembly to figure out what can and can't be done, and this union issue is going to fit into there. I don't think that this one issue with the unions is going to balance Illinois' budget, but I think it's certainly, it's something that the governor's passionate about, and we're going to have to see where it goes.
And this will be the last question, actually, that I have. How did, and I don't think you can answer this because I think that this predates your tenure, but how did a pension benefit guarantee make it into the Illinois state constitution in the first place? And how did a pledge of 28% of a teacher's salary as the state's portion come to be? So how it got into the Constitution, it got in the Constitution in 1970. I don't even think I was a thought on anybody's mind in 1970. My guess is that someone had the foresight to say, you know what, I don't trust Illinois government, even back in 1970, imagine that. That someone was sitting at the negotiating table as Illinois was having a constitutional convention and said, I bet there's going to come a point where someone is going to try to take my pension benefit away from me because the state is going to botch up what they do with my pension money, and then they're going to blame it on me, and they're going to try to take my money away. And so they put it into the Constitution. Now, that's a guess, but I don't think it's far off because this is where we're at, right? The state
didn't use the money the way it was supposed to. It didn't fund the pensions the way it was supposed to. And now the state says, you know what, we're so bad that we have to reform the pension benefit. And I think it's tragic. You know, I voted for the pension reform because the state is so bad, and we need to look at fixing the problem. But the way we got there, and the fact that teachers and firefighters and police are becoming vilified, I think that's tragic, because, you know, we can debate whether teachers make too much or too little, but that was the deal that they agreed to. Just like if you take a job, and that's, you know, they promise you a 401k or whatever it is, you know, they just worked. And they put their money in, and teachers don't get Social Security, and the state stole their money. You know, and so it doesn't mean you don't have to fix it, and like I said, I voted for it. But, and I think the reason that it's there is because of this very problem of the state couldn't be trusted, can't be trusted with the money. I mean, in 2000, I think it was 2000 or 2002, Illinois borrowed $8 billion. They issued bonds under Governor Blagojevich to make the pension payments. Like, we didn't have the money, we didn't use, so we were going to borrow the money to make the pension payments. We didn't even use the borrowed money to make the pension payment. And so that, you know, that's the problem, you know. And to me, I look at it as, this is the problem that's here right now. You can't go back, you got to look forward, but I mean, that's the problem. And I think it probably had, in 1970, I'd have to look at what the numbers were back then, but someone must have thought that this very day was going to come.
Mm-hmm. And do you happen to know why judges weren't included in that pension reform?
You know, there was an argument that the judges were going to have a conflict and they couldn't vote on it. There's the cynical view that how would judges ever pass this if they were part of it. You know, the bill, I argued that the judges should be in it and was told it's just not going to happen. And I argued again that the judges should be included in it. It's not going to happen. And so then you're in a position of, do I not vote for it at all because the judges aren't included, or do we vote for it and see what, you know, what the outcome is going to be? But certainly, I think everybody has a right to be very cynical about why that was. Judges have pensions, and their pension system is underfunded. It's the second most underfunded system. The first is the General Assembly. Those pension funds are relatively small compared to the teacher retirement system, but the General Assembly, I think, is like 60 or 70% underfunded. I mean, it's horrific.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Drury, for being very informative. If you'd like to make a closing statement, please take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll conclude the program.
First, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this event, and all the events you put on. They're really great. The only pitch I'll make to you is a lot of people say, I don't know what you're doing. What are you up to? I don't know what's going on in state government. We try very hard through email, through Facebook, through press releases to let people know what we're doing. If you aren't getting our emails, if you're not here because of something you got from me, we have a sign-up sheet out there. We don't sell emails. We don't give them to each other. It really is just to be able to push information to you about what's going on, so I'd encourage you to do that. Another question we always get is, what is the best way to communicate with you if I have an issue? We try to respond to every email. I try to take meetings with everybody who wants to meet with me. It's harder when I'm in session, which is currently going on right now. But, you know, if people have issues, I don't know if you have an issue if you don't tell me. I don't know if you're unhappy with what I'm doing, with what the governor's doing, with what the school board's doing, or with what your mayor's doing, with what your garbage collector's doing, if you don't tell me. So I'd say, you know, to me, it's important that people just be involved in government. I come to these meetings, one, to provide information, but hopefully let people know I'm a real person. I have 2 little kids at home who, you know, treat me like any little kid treats their dad. I'm just like everybody else. So we're here to provide information. I'm here to, you know, give answers. And, you know, let us know. Like I said, my cards are outside. There's a sign-in sheet outside. And, you know, please stay involved. And I'm happy to stick around, you know, for a little bit after this if people have any individual questions they want to ask me. But thank you all for coming out on a Wednesday night.
Thank you. You did a yeoman's job.